At 5:52 a.m. on December 26, 1996, a 911 dispatcher in Boulder, Colorado, received a frantic call. A mother claimed her 6-year-old daughter had been kidnapped, but there was no forced entry, no witnesses, no kidnapper. Instead, a 3-page ransom note lay on the staircase inside their home. 7 hours later, that same little girl's body would be found in the basement of her own home. This is the story of JonBenét Ramsey. The Ramsey family lived in Boulder's prestigious Cherry Creek neighborhood. John Ramsey was a successful businessman. Patsy was a former beauty queen and devoted mother. Their older son Burke was 9 years old. JonBenét was 6, a pageant participant with golden curls and a precocious talent for performing. December 25th, 1996 was Christmas Day. The family had spent the evening together, attending a holiday party. They returned home around 9:30 p.m., seemingly without incident. That night, the children were put to bed. JonBenét slept in her room on the second floor. Her parents retired to their master bedroom down the hall. Patsy Ramsey woke early on December 26th, around 5:45 a.m. She had slept in her red jacket and full clothes. She did not notice anything unusual at first, but when she went downstairs, Patsy discovered the spiral staircase blocked by 3 pages of a handwritten ransom note. It was the size of a legal pad, single-spaced, dense with text. The note began, "Mr. Ramsey, listen carefully. We have your daughter in our possession." It demanded $118,000 in ransom, the exact amount of John Ramsey's year-end bonus. The note contained strange details, references to a foreign faction, warnings not to contact police, instructions for a midnight delivery. It was signed SBTC Defenders. At 5:52 a.m., Patsy Ramsey called 911. Her voice was panicked but coherent. She reported her daughter kidnapped and requested police immediately. Dispatcher Linda Arndt took the call. Patsy was frantic, tearful, but remarkably articulate about the ransom note's details and the kidnapping claim. Boulder police arrived within minutes. Officers entered through the front entrance. The house was unlocked. No signs of forced entry were discovered anywhere on the exterior. Officer Rick French was first inside. He found Patsy Ramsey in the kitchen, still holding the 3-page ransom note. She handed it to police without hesitation. Within the hour, John Ramsey woke to the chaos. Police asked him to search the house for anything unusual or out of place. He claimed nothing appeared disturbed. The ransom note's unusual length and detailed demands puzzled investigators immediately. Kidnappers rarely leave such extensive written instructions. The amount demanded, $118,000, was oddly specific. Officers checked the basement, the crawl spaces, and the attic. Every door, every window was locked from the inside. No external signs of forced entry existed anywhere. By mid-morning, police were baffled. The kidnapping defied logic. Why leave a ransom note inside the home? Why demand a specific amount tied to the father's finances? Around 1 p.m., nearly 7 hours after the initial 911 call, John Ramsey and family friend Fleet White descended into the basement wine cellar. What they discovered would horrify the nation. JonBenét's small body was found wrapped in a white blanket on the basement floor. Her hands bound above her head, a garrote around her neck. She had been dead for hours. The medical examiner later concluded she likely died on Christmas night or very early Christmas morning, not during an ongoing kidnapping. The timeline shattered the kidnapping narrative. The ransom note was written after JonBenét was already dead. The foreign faction had never existed. The case became a murder investigation. Within hours, the crime scene was catastrophically contaminated. Family members had walked through the house, touched objects, and contaminated evidence before police protocols could be established. The Ramsey house became ground zero for one of America's most enduring mysteries. Who killed JonBenét? Why was the ransom note written inside? And why would someone stage a kidnapping? Nearly 3 decades later, the case remains officially unsolved. The identity of JonBenét's killer has never been conclusively determined. Boulder police have never fully closed their investigation. The crime scene so bizarre, so contaminated, so filled with unexplained details that even decades of investigation has failed to pierce the darkness surrounding that Christmas morning. Before JonBenét Ramsey became a name synonymous with unsolved tragedy, she was simply a 6-year-old girl with dreams larger than her small frame. Her world was one of rhinestones and spotlights, of tiaras and practiced smiles. The child beauty pageant circuit had become her stage, her identity, her childhood. The Ramsey family occupied a place of considerable privilege in Boulder, Colorado. John Ramsey's success as an executive in the technology sector had secured their position among the community's elite. Their Queen Anne mansion sprawled across the landscape like a statement of achievement. 3 stories, 14 rooms, decorated with the trappings of upper-middle-class success. JonBenét's pageant participation was woven into the fabric of this affluent lifestyle. Beginning at age 4, she competed in youth beauty competitions, following a path her mother, Patsy, had pioneered. Patsy Ramsey had been Miss West Virginia in 1977 and carried with her the legacy of that achievement. She channeled her own pageant aspirations into her daughter's competitive journey. The footage from these pageants would later haunt the investigation. Amateur video recordings showed JonBenét in full stage makeup, performing choreographed routines with unsettling sophistication for a child her age. Media outlets obtained and repeatedly broadcast these pageant tapes, transforming a child's innocent performances into something far more troubling through the lens of adult interpretation. The American public's fascination with child beauty pageants had reached fever pitch. Pageant culture represented an uncomfortable convergence of childhood innocence and adult performance standards. Critics questioned the appropriateness of such performances. Arguments emerged about whether child pageants encouraged unhealthy focus on appearance, competition, and adult-like presentation from young children. JonBenét participated in numerous competitions: America's Royale, Rocky Mountain Pageant, National Pageant Organization events. She accumulated titles and trophies throughout her brief childhood. By age 6, she had already become a seasoned performer, comfortable on stage despite her tender years. This precociousness would later complicate the narrative of her as a vulnerable victim. The Ramsey family's wealth allowed them to invest heavily in pageant participation. Costumes were custom-made, choreography was professionally designed, travel to competitions was frequent. This lifestyle placed JonBenét at the intersection of childhood and performance, normality and spectacle. Her daily routine included practice, coaching, and preparation for the next competition. Yet beneath the pageant world lay deeper currents. Questions would emerge about what pressures, visible or invisible, accompanied this lifestyle. What did it mean for a 6-year-old to live for the stage? The Ramsey home itself became a character in the emerging narrative, a space designed for success and achievement, yet soon to become the focal point of America's darkest questions. John Ramsey's business acumen had created financial security that most American families could only imagine. This wealth shaped every aspect of JonBenét's existence, from her opportunities to her vulnerabilities. The family's standing in Boulder was impeccable. They attended church, participated in community events, and represented the aspirational ideal of American success and stability. Yet this public image of perfection would become complicated by the pageant footage itself. As media outlets dissected the tapes, discomfort grew about the nature of what was being presented. The videos showed a child with professional stage presence, elaborate makeup, and a level of confidence that seemed beyond her years. Some viewers were enchanted. Others grew deeply uneasy. Child beauty pageants existed in a murky, ethical landscape. They were legal, popular, and generally accepted. Yet they occupied uncomfortable territory between wholesome competition and problematic commodification of childhood. The pageant world of the 1990s was largely unregulated. Standards for makeup, costume appropriateness, and performance content were subjective and varied widely between organizations. JonBenét's mother seemed to drive much of her participation. Patsy's own pageant background created an inherited trajectory that JonBenét followed. Whether by choice or circumstance remains unclear. The child's older brother, Burke, had not followed the same pageant path. This distinction would later raise questions about family dynamics and the specific pressures placed on JonBenét. By December 1996, JonBenét had been competing in pageants for roughly 2 years. She had won numerous titles and accumulated a collection of accolades remarkable for her age. The pageant circuit had become normalized within her family structure. Training, competing, winning had become routine. JonBenét seemed to accept this lifestyle as simply how childhood worked. Yet the uncomfortable reality was that countless hours of JonBenét's performances had been recorded, distributed, and studied by an increasingly large audience. These tapes preserved not just her performances, but a specific moment in American cultural history when the line between childhood innocence and adult spectacle had become dangerously blurred. The pageant world offered JonBenét attention, achievement, and a sense of identity. But it also exposed her to thousands of eyes, created a public persona, and placed her within an industry designed around presentation and judgment. When tragedy struck on December 25, 1996, the pageant footage would become something far darker in the public consciousness. Innocent performances would be reinterpreted through a lens of terrible tragedy and desperate searching for answers. December 26, 1996, the Ramsey home in Boulder, Colorado. What should have been the most carefully preserved crime scene in modern American history became instead a forensic catastrophe. At 5:52 a.m., Patsy Ramsey called 911. A ransom note had been discovered. 16 pages of rambling demands, but within minutes, the house transformed into something unthinkable. A crime scene without boundaries. Boulder police detective Linda Arndt arrived first. She found no visible signs of forced entry. The house appeared secure, yet instead of immediately cordoning off the entire structure, officers allowed family members to move freely through every room. Friends arrived. Family members embraced. Clergy circulated. A minister stood in the kitchen. Well-meaning relatives walked the halls, touched door frames, navigated staircases. Each footstep was contamination. Each gesture was destruction. No one wore protective equipment. No one was documented. No one was asked to leave. The Boulder Police Department had not yet declared this a homicide. That hesitation proved fatal to the investigation's integrity. Then came the critical decision. At approximately 1 p.m., John Ramsey entered the basement. He descended into darkness. He found his daughter JonBenét deceased, wrapped in a blanket. He lifted her body. He carried her upstairs, his hands on her body. Her positioning altered forever, fibers transferred, forensic evidence contaminated beyond recovery. The crime scene's spatial relationship to evidence destroyed in seconds. Detective Arndt watched. She did not stop him. Later, investigators questioned this decision, whether John Ramsey truly discovered his daughter then, or whether this was the moment evidence was deliberately compromised. No crime scene photographs documented JonBenét's position before her body was moved. No forensic video recorded the basement's original state. No measurements were taken of where she lay. This erasure was complete. Hours later, when Boulder police finally understood this was a homicide, they attempted to secure the residence, but the damage was irreversible. The house had been walked through, touched, contaminated by at least 20 people. Protocol demanded the immediate establishment of a perimeter. Protocol demanded protective equipment for all who entered. Protocol demanded documentation of every person's movement. Every protocol failed. Every standard was abandoned. The Boulder Police Department later defended their response, citing the ransom note's demand for cash by 10 a.m. They believed JonBenét was still alive, but experienced investigators knew better. A 16-page ransom note suggested staging. FBI behavioral analysts would later conclude the note bore hallmarks of fictional fantasy. It referenced movies, contained odd phrasing, demonstrated knowledge of the family's finances. It was not written by a stranger. It was written by someone inside the house. Yet by the time this analysis emerged, the crime scene had been rendered useless. Fiber evidence was contaminated. DNA evidence was compromised. Spatial relationships were erased. The physical truth of what occurred in that basement had been destroyed. In 2008, Boulder authorities finally acknowledged formal contamination. Their official investigation recognized that friend Fleet White had moved items in the basement, that John Ramsey had touched his daughter's body, that the scene was compromised beyond forensic recovery. This admission came 12 years too late. By then, memories had faded. Witnesses' statements had been contradicted. The foundational evidence that might have proven guilt or innocence had been irretrievably lost to negligence. The JonBenét Ramsey case became the perfect example of investigative failure. Not because evidence was absent, but because protocol was abandoned. Not because the truth was unknowable, but because the crime scene was destroyed. Detective Linda Arndt's decision to allow John Ramsey to recover his daughter's body, made in moments of confusion about whether she was alive, became the investigation's defining compromise. One father's act of love had erased the path to justice. Today, over 25 years later, questions remain unanswered. DNA evidence recovered from JonBenét's body has never been definitively matched to any suspect, but a perfectly preserved crime scene might have provided the answer decades ago. The Ramsey home stands as a monument to investigative failure, not because of the people inside it that morning, but because the institution charged with protecting the truth abandoned its most fundamental responsibility, preserving the crime scene itself. In the early morning hours of December 26, 1996, Boulder police discovered something unprecedented, a ransom note so detailed, so elaborate, that it would become the central puzzle of the entire investigation. Not one page, not two, but 3 full pages of handwritten demands, covering nearly every detail of a kidnapper's supposed plan. The length alone was extraordinary. The ransom amount demanded, $118,000, a strikingly specific figure. Investigators immediately recognized its significance. John Ramsey had just received a $118,000 bonus from his company mere days before Christmas. This was no random kidnapper firing demands into the darkness. This person knew intimate details of John Ramsey's financial life. The implications were staggering. Document examiners would scrutinize every word, every peculiarity. The note opened with Mr. Ramsey, a formal address, then shifted to rambling declarations about a foreign faction responsible for the kidnapping. But investigators discovered something that would reshape the entire case. The paper came from a notepad found inside the Ramsey home. The pen used was also from the house, an inside job indicator of the most damning kind. A kidnapper enters a home in darkness, climbs stairs, locates a child, yet takes time to find writing materials within the residence. The logic seemed inverted, unless the author lived there already. Handwriting analysts studied the note with unprecedented intensity. Could it match Patsy Ramsey's writing? The similarities were notable. Certain letter formations, word spacing patterns, and stylistic flourishes seemed consistent, yet handwriting analysis remains controversial. No two handwriting experts reached consensus. Some saw definitive similarities, others saw significant differences. The science was subjective. The language within the note was curious. Pop culture references emerged. SBTC appeared repeatedly, initials never definitively explained. Foreign faction language seemed contrived, almost theatrical. The note rambled for 3 pages, discussing sleeping arrangements, suitcase preparations, and movie references. A real kidnapper focused on profit would be concise. This was verbose, almost confessional. Linguistic experts analyzed sentence structure, vocabulary, and phrasing patterns. The note contained grammatical inconsistencies, formal passages followed by casual language, almost as if written by someone switching between personas. The phrase, "Don't try to grow a brain" stood out as particularly odd, unusually aggressive for a demand letter. Psychological profiles suggested it revealed personality traits of the author. The note's tone shifted between menacing and almost playful. Threats of harm alternated with oddly specific instructions about money delivery. This contradiction troubled investigators profoundly. One striking detail: the note mentioned specific behavioral instructions for John Ramsey, suggesting intimate knowledge of his schedule, his habits, his financial position. How did this supposed intruder know so much? Forensic examiners measured pen pressure variations across the 3 pages. Did pressure remain consistent, suggesting one continuous writing session, or did it vary, indicating multiple authors or sessions? The inconsistencies were documented meticulously. Some words appeared pressed deeply into paper, others seemed lighter, hurried. The spacing between lines varied inexplicably throughout the note. Could Patsy Ramsey have deliberately altered her handwriting, written in an unusual manner to disguise her identity? This theory seemed speculative, but remained part of investigative consideration. The note's reference to SBTC remained unexplained for years. Some suggested it meant "saved by the cross." Others proposed completely different interpretations. The acronym haunted investigators. Behavioral linguists noted the note's unusual structure. It began as ransom instructions, evolved into threats, then concluded with almost apologetic language. What psychological state produced such volatility? The physical evidence of the notepad and pen were tested for fingerprints. No clear prints emerged. The author had apparently taken precautions, suggesting premeditation and awareness of forensic investigation. Yet if this was an inside job, why such elaborate precautions? A family member might assume they'd naturally have their prints in the home. The care suggested either extreme paranoia or external knowledge of forensics. The ransom note remains central to the investigation's fractured foundation. It simultaneously suggested inside knowledge and criminal expertise. It indicated family involvement, yet contradicted simple explanations. Years later, document examiners would revisit the note. New technologies emerged. Computer analysis of handwriting patterns provided additional data, yet fundamental questions persisted unanswered. The ransom note enigma became this case's defining contradiction. So detailed it seemed written by someone inside the family, yet so strange it suggested outside criminal involvement. Both interpretations held troubling weight. The body of JonBenét Ramsey arrived at the Boulder County Coroner's Office on December 26, 1996. What the autopsy would reveal would be as complex and troubling as the crime scene itself. Coroner John Meyer's examination documented 2 distinct mechanisms of death: blunt force trauma to the skull and asphyxiation by garrote. The question of sequence, which injury came first, would become central to understanding how JonBenét died. The skull fracture measured 8.5 inches across the right parietal bone. The force required to create such an injury suggested a severe blow, possibly from a flashlight or similar blunt object found at the scene. Yet this alone may not have been fatal. The garrote itself was constructed from a Sharpie paintbrush and a cord, likely cord from the home. This ligature was wrapped around JonBenét's neck with a stick used as a tourniquet. The pressure required to create the ligature marks suggested sustained, deliberate compression. Dr. Meyer documented hemorrhaging in the neck tissues beneath the ligature mark. The petechial hemorrhages, tiny blood vessels burst from pressure, were concentrated around her eyes and face. This was consistent with asphyxiation occurring while she was alive. The autopsy revealed bruising on her wrists and ankles. Ligature marks suggested she had been bound, though no ligatures were found on her person. The absence of these restraints raised immediate questions. Had they been removed, hidden, worn away? What puzzled investigators most was the sequence question. Did the skull fracture occur before or after the garroting? If before, the fracture might have rendered her unconscious, meaning the garrote would have been applied to an already incapacitated child. If the garroting occurred first, The skull fracture would have come as she struggled or was moved. The lack of extensive bruising on her body suggested she had not fought violently. This implied either shock, unconsciousness, or compliance during the assault. The toxicology report showed no drugs or alcohol in her system. JonBenét's last meal, documented in her stomach contents, included pineapple. But the Ramseys insisted no pineapple had been served at home that night. This discrepancy demanded explanation. Pineapple digestion indicated consumption roughly 1 to 2 hours before death. If JonBenét died around midnight, the pineapple would have been eaten between 10 p.m. and 11 p.m. Where? Who gave it to her? The bowl on the kitchen table became a physical puzzle. Some investigators theorized an intruder gave her the pineapple, a gesture of comfort or control before the assault. Others suggested she had eaten it earlier, and Patsy Ramsey's memory was simply incorrect. The ambiguity reflected the case's larger problems, conflicting timelines and uncertain sequences. The autopsy also documented vaginal trauma. Dr. Meyer found evidence of recent irritation and possible sexual contact. This finding was deeply troubling and suggested the assault had been multifaceted, both violent and sexual in nature. Yet the extent and interpretation of this trauma became contested. Different specialists offered different opinions about its cause and timing. Some saw evidence of recent abuse. Others suggested the findings were inconclusive. Medical science had limits. The autopsy revealed no evidence of struggle in her lungs, no aspirated fluid or foreign material. Her fingernails were intact and clean, with no defensive wounds. Whoever had killed JonBenét, she had not fought back with the vigor expected of a child in mortal danger. This passivity suggested multiple possibilities. She may have known her attacker and been shocked by their violence. She may have been incapacitated or unconscious when the assault escalated, or she may have been restrained in a way that prevented effective resistance. The garret itself was never definitively linked to any single person. The paintbrush came from the home, and the cord's origin remained unclear. No fingerprints were recovered from the garret, unusual if assembled hastily, suggestive if constructed with deliberation and care. Fiber analysis found fibers on JonBenét's body, from her clothing, from the home, from sources unknown. Trace evidence connected her to people and places, but the timeline of these contacts remained muddled. Fibers could transfer by innocent contact or during assault. The autopsy revealed no seminal fluid, complicating sexual assault investigation. DNA evidence from under her fingernails and from vaginal swabs existed, but it did not match any family members. An unknown male profile emerged, but from where and whom remained elusive. This unknown male DNA became the centerpiece of the intruder theory, yet it also raised troubling questions. Could it have come from consensual contact hours or days before death? Could it represent contamination? The science could not answer these questions alone. Dr. Meyer's final determination was asphyxia by garrote, with the skull fracture contributing to the death. Yet the precise sequence, the exact timeline, and the complete context of how these injuries occurred remained scientifically indeterminate. The autopsy answered some questions but raised countless others. The forensic evidence was not a simple story. It was a collection of fragments: bone fractures, ligature marks, stomach contents, fiber traces, DNA profiles, each piece potentially significant, none completely conclusive on its own. The autopsy was thorough, but truth remained elusive. What the body could tell investigators was this: JonBenét Ramsey was killed by compression of her neck, combined with blunt force trauma. The violence was deliberate and sustained. The perpetrator had access to items in her home, but the identity and exact motive remained hidden, locked within the unanswered questions of that Christmas night. In the aftermath of JonBenét's death, suspicion did not fall on strangers. It fell inward, on those closest to her, her own family. John Ramsey, a successful businessman, and Patsy Ramsey, a former beauty queen, became the focus of intense investigation. Their actions in those first hours would haunt them for decades. Within hours of discovering their daughter's body, the Ramseys hired attorneys. They refused to submit to separate interviews with Boulder police. They would not take a polygraph test. To investigators and the public, these were red flags. Why would innocent parents impede the investigation into their daughter's murder? Why the need for legal counsel before cooperating fully? The grand jury that convened in 1999 believed they had found answers. After 10 months of testimony and evidence, they handed down an indictment, but not for murder, for something else entirely. The grand jury theorized that the Ramseys, or someone in their immediate circle, had been involved in an accidental death. JonBenét was struck, injured, and then deliberately concealed. That became the unspoken theory. But the district attorney at the time, Alex Hunter, made a stunning decision. He would not prosecute based on the grand jury's indictment. The evidence, he believed, was insufficient. The case would remain officially unsolved. The accusation, though never formally prosecuted, cast a permanent shadow. John and Patsy Ramsey lived the rest of their lives under the weight of grand jury suspicion, legally presumed innocent but publicly questioned. Burke Ramsey, JonBenét's 9-year-old brother, also found himself the subject of intense speculation. Some theorists pointed to his behavioral history. Others examined the night of the murder with forensic scrutiny. A flashlight found in the home, a cricket bat, inconsistencies in timelines. Each detail was dissected. Experts and amateurs alike debated whether a child could commit such a crime, whether fear and panic could explain parental cover-up. Burke Ramsey was never charged. As a minor at the time, and given the lack of conclusive evidence, he remained protected by law and circumstance. Yet public suspicion persisted, fueled by media and internet speculation. In 2008, Burke Ramsey reached settlements in defamation lawsuits against major news outlets that had suggested his involvement. The legal victories offered vindication, but not closure and not universal belief. The family's early hiring of attorneys, their cautious statements, their refusal of certain investigative procedures, these became embedded in the narrative. Whether evidence of guilt or prudent legal strategy, the interpretation divided observers. Patsy Ramsey died of cancer in 2006, never having seen her daughter's killer identified. John Ramsey would spend decades publicly defending his family while living under the umbrella of unresolved suspicion. The grand jury's decision to indict without prosecution remains extraordinary. It allowed the Ramseys to avoid trial while ensuring they could never truly escape public judgment. The family remained forever suspended between accusation and exoneration. What remains certain is this: no evidence has conclusively proven the Ramseys' guilt, and no confession has ever established their innocence. The case against them was never formally tested in court, and JonBenét's killer remains unknown. On June 25, 2008, Boulder District Attorney Mary Lacey made a stunning announcement. The Ramsey family, suspects for over a decade, were officially exonerated. The reason? DNA evidence that didn't match John, Patsy, or Burke Ramsey. An unknown male's genetic profile recovered from JonBenét's body. This male DNA appeared in multiple locations under JonBenét's fingernails on her underwear. It belonged to someone who had touched the child. For over 15 years, this biological evidence remained a mystery. Who was this unknown contributor, and how did his DNA end up on a murdered child? The discovery of touch DNA at the crime scene reignited the intruder theory. Touch DNA transfers through skin-to-skin contact or handling of objects. It's fragile. It's real. Under JonBenét's fingernails, DNA from someone whose profile had never been entered into any database. The forensic community debated, could an unknown person have committed this crime? The intruder theory relied on physical evidence investigators had noted from day one. The basement window, broken or ajar. How did it break? When? That window, located near the laundry room, became crucial. Was it forced entry? Evidence suggested it had been broken prior to the crime, but investigators disagreed on timing. A palm print was discovered on the basement door frame. It didn't match the Ramsey family members. Another unknown contributor. Another piece pointing toward an external intruder. The basement became critical to the intruder narrative. JonBenét's body was discovered there. The stun marks on her shoulder suggested unusual trauma, possibly from a device. Some forensic experts noted the basement room where JonBenét was found showed signs of staging. But staging by whom? Family members protecting someone, or the intruder covering his tracks? The DNA evidence presented both hope and complications. Touch DNA is powerful. It proves physical contact, but it can persist on surfaces for hours or days without meaning guilt. Defense attorneys argued the unknown DNA could belong to an innocent person, a paramedic, a police officer, someone who contacted JonBenét after death, contaminating the evidence. Prosecutors countered. The DNA was under the fingernails and in the underwear. These intimate locations suggested contact during the crime, not after. In 2008, DA Mary Lacey publicly stated she believed an intruder committed the crime. The DNA evidence supported this conclusion. She exonerated John, Patsy, and Burke Ramsey, yet the intruder theory had skeptics. If an unknown person entered the home, murdered a child, why no forced entry signs? Why would he spend time writing a lengthy ransom note? The ransom note remained the central puzzle. 26 pages, written inside the home, using pen and paper found there. Why would an intruder write such an elaborate message? Some investigators proposed a hybrid theory. An intruder entered the home, encountered JonBenét, and a violent crime resulted. The family then found her, panicked, and contacted police. The DNA evidence alone couldn't solve the case. Genetic profiles don't explain motive, method, or opportunity. The intruder theory raised as many questions as it answered. By the 2010 S, the unknown DNA had become the most significant piece of physical evidence. It shifted suspicion away from the family and toward an external threat. Yet 20 years after JonBenét's death, the unknown DNA contributor remained unidentified. No match in national databases, no confession, no resolution. The intruder theory represented a possibility supported by forensic evidence. But without identifying the unknown DNA donor, the theory remained incomplete. Who was he? Where was he now? Touch DNA had evolved investigative science. It provided biological proof of contact, but in JonBenét's case, it raised as much uncertainty as it resolved. The Ramsey family's exoneration was official, but without identifying the unknown DNA contributor, public certainty remained elusive. Suspicion had shifted. Questions remained unanswered. By 2006, 13 years after JonBenét's death, desperation had replaced methodology in the investigation. Then came John Mark Carr, a former schoolteacher from Alabama. In Bangkok, Thailand, he confessed to murdering JonBenét Ramsey. Carr claimed he had accidentally killed her during a sexual encounter gone wrong. Authorities arrested him. The case seemed finally solved, but DNA evidence told a different story. The DNA found under JonBenét's fingernails and in her underwear did not match Carr's profile. The confession was false. Carr was released. The embarrassment was profound. Boulder police had pursued a phantom suspect while the real killer remained free. The Carr debacle exposed deeper institutional problems that had plagued the investigation since 1996. Jurisdictional conflicts between Boulder police and the DA's office created operational paralysis. The Boulder Police Department and the District Attorney's Office disagreed fundamentally about investigative direction, suspect priority, and evidence interpretation. Information sharing broke down repeatedly. Before Carr, dozens of persons of interest had been investigated and eliminated. Intruder theories competed with family involvement theories, creating investigative confusion. Richard White, a man with a criminal history, lived near the Ramsey home in 1996. He became a prime suspect, but his DNA did not match the unidentified male profile. Michael Helgoth, a local electrician and contractor with access to the Ramsey home's utilities, was also investigated intensively. He died of an apparent suicide in 1997. Helgoth's death raised questions. Was it guilt-driven? Was it unrelated? Investigators found no definitive connection to the murder, but suspicion lingered for decades. The grand jury, convened in 1999, heard months of evidence. 16 jurors reviewed testimony from 92 witnesses and examined physical evidence exhaustively. In October 1999, the grand jury voted to indict someone. The indictment remained sealed for years. Jurors were bound by law to secrecy about their deliberations. In 2008, grand jury documents were finally released. The jurors indicated they believed 2 people were involved, not one, and that access to the house was crucial. The grand jury suggested someone inside the household had knowledge of the crime, possibly Patrick Sandoval, but evidence remained circumstantial and unprovable. Over decades, more than 100 people were investigated: ex-convicts, drifters, suspicious neighbors, family associates. Each led to dead ends or was ruled out by DNA. The jurisdictional dysfunction worsened over time. Boulder police wanted to pursue certain suspects aggressively. The DA's office resisted, citing weak evidence and constitutional concerns. By 2010, the case had consumed millions in investigative resources. Multiple detectives had retired. New investigators inherited incomplete files and departmental animosity. The false confession by John Mark Carr in 2006 became a symbol of investigative desperation. Without that DNA exclusion, an innocent man might have been convicted. By 2015, Boulder Police Chief Mark Beckner admitted publicly that jurisdictional and procedural problems had compromised the investigation from its earliest days. The case revealed a fundamental truth. When agencies fail to coordinate, share information freely, and maintain unified investigative direction, guilty parties escape and innocent people face suspicion. Suspects came and went. Confessions proved false. DNA eliminated person after person, yet the unidentified male profile remained constant, a genetic ghost haunting the investigation. The parade of dead ends reflected not detective incompetence, but rather the limitations of 1996 forensic science and the chaotic response to a high-profile case. Yet institutional dysfunction was real and documented. It was not bad luck. It was a failure of leadership, communication, and organizational discipline that directly obstructed justice. 26 years have passed since JonBenét Patricia Ramsey was found dead in her family's basement on Christmas morning, 1996. Yet the case remains unsolved, a wound that never fully healed in American true crime consciousness. In the years following the initial investigation, law enforcement pursued countless leads and suspects, but gaps remained, critical questions unanswered, crucial evidence contested. The grand jury's 1999 indictment suggested 2 people were involved in the crime, yet the prosecution never secured charges that would hold. In 2008, newly examined evidence, including DNA found beneath JonBenét's fingernails and on her clothing, did not match any family members or known suspects in the case. This unknown DNA profile became a beacon of hope for those who believed an intruder was responsible and a persistent mystery for investigators. By the early 2000s, Patsy Ramsey lived with the unbearable weight of suspicion. She had never been charged, yet remained scrutinized by the public and press. In June 2006, Patsy succumbed to ovarian cancer at age 40. She died knowing the truth of who killed her daughter would likely never be known. Her death marked a tragic milestone. A mother, never exonerated, never convicted, passed away carrying secrets. Whether about her daughter's death or her own knowledge remained forever ambiguous. John Ramsey continued to maintain his family's innocence, establishing the JonBenét Ramsey Memorial Foundation dedicated to finding the truth. Yet even his efforts could not restore what was lost: a child's life, a family's peace, and the clarity that justice demands. The case took on new momentum in 2016 when DNA genealogical testing technologies emerged. tools that could potentially identify unknown profiles through family connections. Crime laboratories began re-examining decades-old evidence using cutting-edge methodologies. The unknown DNA profile was uploaded to genealogical databases, a digital dragnet cast across millions of family trees. In 2021, investigators pursued new leads based on genealogical DNA matches, yet each promising avenue led to dead ends or individuals who could be conclusively eliminated. The persistent question haunted every new development. If the unknown DNA belonged to an intruder who entered the Ramsey home, and why? And if it did not, if it belonged to someone inside, why did it never match? The JonBenét Ramsey case transformed American true crime discourse. It exposed the flaws in early forensic investigation and the dangers of tunnel vision. Training academies now use the case as a cautionary example of how contaminated crime scenes, competing theories, and public pressure can derail investigations. The case influenced protocols for evidence preservation, investigative objectivity, and media relations, reforms born from the tragedy of an unsolved crime and a family's enduring pain. In 2019, Boulder Police Department exonerated John and Patsy Ramsey based on DNA evidence. Yet the exoneration provided no closure. It simply acknowledged what remained unknown. Burke Ramsey, JonBenét's brother, lived his entire adult life under the shadow of questions about his involvement. He granted few interviews, his perspective largely absent from public discourse. The family's privacy, once violated by the international media firestorm, became their refuge. Yet that silence only deepened public speculation and the case's mystique. Today, the case remains nominally open. Boulder police continue to accept tips, though resources dedicated to investigation have waned over decades. The ransom note, still the most unusual element of the crime, has never been definitively attributed to anyone. Graphologists offered conflicting analyses, stylometric experts debated its authorship. The 3-page document remains a cryptic artifact, analyzed obsessively by amateur investigators and professionals alike, yet yielding no consensus. Internet forums and podcasts have transformed amateur sleuths into influential voices in the case. Theories proliferate, some evidence-based, others purely speculative. This democratization of true crime has given voice to persistent questions, but it has also spread misinformation and renewed harassment of individuals connected to the case. The JonBenét Ramsey case stands as a reminder that American justice, for all its advances in forensic science and investigative technology, remains imperfect and incomplete. A child's death, captured in photographs, examined in laboratories, debated in public forums, remains unsolved because evidence speaks in a language investigation has not yet learned to decipher completely. For the Ramsey family, the case is not a mystery to be solved. It is a wound that will never fully close. The answer to who killed JonBenét may now rest in graves, literal and metaphorical. Patsy died not knowing. John and Burke lived decades under suspicion. The intruder, if real, has never been found. These are the true crimes of this case: uncertainty and loss. As advances in technology offer new hope for resolution, the fundamental question remains: will answers, when finally found, bring peace or only deepen the tragedy? The case of JonBenét Patricia Ramsey endures as American crime's greatest unsolved mystery, not because the evidence is absent, but because its meaning remains forever open to interpretation.